Hello and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Kiri Meyer.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating a community after a loved one has died. Everything we do here is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever need to grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people in this field so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. We're pleased to have Dr. David Fajgenbaum to our show. Dr. Fajgenbaum is currently the co-founder and executive director of the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network and an assistant professor of medicine in transitional medicine and human genetics. Previously, he co-founded in memory of his mother and led the Actively Moving Forward Support Network, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting grieving college students. He is the author of Chasing My Cure, release date 9/10/19, and author of We Get It, Voices of College Students and Young Adults.
So welcome, David. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thrilled to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So now you and I have been friends for about a decade since you started AMF, and I was an AMFer myself. And I was so glad when your book, We Get It, was published, telling all these stories of grieving young adults and grieving college kids. And now you have another wonderful book out. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about these books and just kind of let us know a little bit more.
Sure, absolutely, Kiri. It's been so wonderful being friends, colleagues for all these years. I started AMF, as Andy mentioned, in memory of my mom when I was in college. I lost her to cancer when I was a sophomore in college, and her initials were Anne-Marie Fajgenbaum, and I started a group in her memory called AMF. Her initials also stood for Ailing Mothers and Fathers, Now Actively Moving Forward. And from that experience of losing her and recognizing the challenges that young adults face, especially during the college years, it felt important to start a support group and a support network for grieving young adults. And so we did that together. Of course, you started a chapter at UW Green Bay. I started a chapter at Georgetown. We help students all over the country. AMF continues to help students all over the country. But one thing that I realized a few years into AMF was that we were making a really deep impact on a number of campuses, but there were also a lot of campuses where there weren't AMF chapters. And so I had this really important sense that I wanted to create something that could be kind of a pocket support group outside of a true traditional support group on a college campus, that students could benefit from reading something. And really the benefit I always got from our support groups was being able to connect with people who get it, who understand what I'm going through. So we had a bunch of students from all over the country share their personal stories of grief, so that if you're a reader, you can talk to, or you can read about people who get what you're going through, and you can normalize grief to exactly what you guys are doing with a show like this. So that was the inspiration behind We Get It. The inspiration behind this new book, Chasing My Cure, is that in the midst of my years trying to expand AMF and also to do my medical training, I became very ill with a disease called multicentric Castleman disease, and was exposed to a new angle of grief and death, and that was that I was deathly ill myself. I actually had my last rites read to me in November of 2010 when the doctors didn't think I would survive. Unfortunately, that was the first of 5 times that I said goodbye to my family, and 5 times the doctors didn't think I would survive. Of course, I did survive. I'm here today, but I learned so many lessons about life from almost dying. And I had been a caregiver. I had seen my mom become sick with cancer. I watched her die when I was in college, and I saw the experience. I felt the experience as a grieving loved one. But I have a new perspective as that one who is dying, actively dying. I've far surpassed the survival statistics and the expectations for how one can survive following a death sentence like idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease. But I've also, the reason I've been able to survive for as long as I have is that I got very involved in research for Castleman disease and actually identified a drug that is extending my life. And so much of my ability to fight back against Castleman's, write this book, shared these stories about dying to help the living, came from the resiliency and the lessons I learned as part of AMF, connecting with other people and realizing that together we can do so much more than we can alone.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. No, it is. I'm curious about. And thank you for that. It was a great overview. What strikes me, just to hear you talk about all of these things, is number one, as a young man, how much life you've lived. Like when you think about, so many people, they may not have a parent die until they're in their 50s or 60s, and then their parent dies, yet alone even have their own issue where they're staring their own death, in the face. And so thinking about, chasing my cure. I mean, I can see why it was an important book to write, but can you talk a little bit more about that book and just, the reality of, one of the things we say on this show a lot is it's called Let's Talk Death, but we end up talking about life and like what death teaches us about life. So I'm curious to hear from you on some of that,
Absolutely. You're so right, Andy. And when I say like the main reason for why I wrote this book is because of how many lessons I learned about life from nearly dying each time and fighting back. And so a few of them that I think are really, really important to me. The first is something that I think you were alluding to, and that's that, as someone my age, I'm 34 years old now. I had my last rites read to me the first time when I was 25. Certainly it's kind of certainly early to experience something like that. Actually, when I was interviewing a candidate for the AMF executive director job a few years ago, he had told me about a book called Halftime, and he said that the book Halftime inspired him to want to apply for the AMF job because it's all about what do you do in the second half of your life. And I had never thought about it before, but I told him, I said, well, if you're at halftime, I guess I'm in overtime. And he looked at me and he was really confused, and because here I am, 26 years old at the time. He's like, "How are you in overtime?" And I said, and I didn't really get into it with him, but I really have this sense of being in overtime. The sense that every second counts. It's time that I didn't think I would have. In overtime in sports games, you have to make every moment count because you don't know how many more you'll have. But what I've learned from that, my mortality has been put in my face. I can, hear the clock ticking every time I get a scan or every time I look at my blood work. But what I've learned is that actually all of us are in overtime. None of us know, how much longer we have. None of us know, and all of us should make the most of every second that we live. And so I think that's one really important lesson. Another important lesson is related to how my experience with grief and death and loss and being part of AMF taught me that many times in life we hope for things and we wish for things that unfortunately, even if they should happen, they don't always happen. Bad things sometimes happen to good people, even when they really do everything right. And so I think that realization helped to inspire another motto I have, and that's that we need to turn our hopes into action. And that's that we should reflect on what we hope for, we should reflect on what we wish for, and then we should do what we can to make that happen. And for me, that was, I hoped for treatment. I hoped for something to help me. I hoped for something to support grieving college students during times of grief. And I realized that if I didn't do it, if I didn't make that thing happen, that it wouldn't happen. And then I think the last thing I'd mention another little tidbit lesson that I'd highlight, and that's that when I was on my deathbed and I looked back on my life and I said goodbye to my family, and this was the first time I really didn't think there was any way that I was going to come back. And I reflected on my life. I realized that I didn't regret anything that I did or anything that I said in my life. What I regretted were the things that I didn't do or I didn't say or that I would not have time to do in the future that I would not have. And that gave me this profound sense that we need to make the most, we need to do the things we want to do, we need to say the things we want to say, and my motto is think it, do it. And it's that, like, sometimes we think of doing things, I have the most amazing wife and now this beautiful daughter. At the time, there were things that I hadn't said to my then girlfriend, now wife, that I regretted, and there were things that I didn't do that I regretted. And so I think that, as you said, you can learn so much about dying and about life, from those two experiences.
I also think it's interesting how, even if we haven't kind of faced our own mortality like you have, like even the mortality of somebody in our lives can kind of bring that to the front of, oh yeah, this is over time. But we don't necessarily, I'm thinking about how grief can sometimes kind of suppress, kind of that motivation that you were just talking about. And I wonder how we can really embrace that, because I think that's such an important part of being a human being. But really kind of when we have like grief brain and stuff going on. Now, when you had grief brain going on, you still created AMF and you were writing a book and you were going to school. Do you have thoughts on kind of how you tried to overcome that or what worked for you?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I found that, I was devastated when my mom was diagnosed, and then when she passed away. It created so much energy inside of me, so much energy that I think could have been directed in a lot of ways. And I think that, when we lose someone that we love, you and I have talked about this before, this idea that you grieve in proportion to how much you love the person, and that it's okay to grieve a lot. You love that person a lot, and it's also okay to maybe, if it's not a perfect, correlation. But I really grieved a lot after my mom's passing, and I found that tremendous amount of energy. I felt like it needed to go somewhere, and for me, by channeling that towards my studies and towards creating AMF, it created for me a sense that I was doing everything I could do to basically turn my mom's death into some sort of a silver lining. In life, we talk a lot about how important it is to find silver linings. So, during the midst of a terrible thing, this is something positive that came from it. But what I really learned and what really helped me was to think about, how can I create a silver lining out of something really tough? My mom passed away. I wish she was here today, and I wish I never lost her. But since I did, what kind of silver lining can I create to make her death something that actually has brought light to the world in some way? And so for me, that was, I need to study to become a doctor so I can take on cancer for future patients. I need to create AMF so that I can keep her memory going on and can help other students. And for me, that was so rewarding to think about her life living on, kind of a way for her, her spirit to go on. And that was something I had control over. I didn't have control over how long she would live and what her, how she would pass, but I had control over how I could keep her memory alive.
To hear you even describe that, it reminds me of a conversation I had with another colleague. We were talking about the idea of hope.
Yeah.
Just what is hope? And by the end of our conversation, I won't go all the way into it, but by the end of our conversation, we concluded that hope is something you actively participate in. It's not something that you're waiting to happen to you, like that you're sitting around waiting on this thing to happen that's going to give you hope. Hope is an activity that you participate in so that you can have that. And I think it's probably true for healing. I think it's probably true for, for peace in our lives. Anything you want to name, those are things that we have to actively participate in. And it is interesting to me that in the midst of your grief, you channeled that. And in a lot of ways, created not just a situation where you were providing some hope and healing for yourself, but I think about all the people who have received hope and healing because of what you did. So, because you took the opportunity to do that. We're still, Kiri and I still interact, or Kiri more than I do, interact with college students who we see they now have hope, and they didn't have it before they were connected with AMF. So, yeah, it's great to
thank you. It's such an important point, and I actually spend a lot of time in my book talking about the various forms of hope and how, some hope can be inspirational, and you can say, because I saw so-and-so do something, that gives me hope that I can overcome, what I'm going through. But sometimes hope can also kind of be paralyzing in the sense that sometimes you can say, I have so much trust in my doctor. I believe so greatly that he or she is going to figure it out, that I'm just going to kind of let them do it. I'm not going to necessarily get involved in fundraising, or I'm not going to necessarily give blood samples for research. I'm not going to ask, what can I do? Because I trust, I have so much hope in them. And I think that it's finding that middle ground where hope can both be inspiring, but it can also create you to feel good inside, but also get you to take on action. It's so important.
I agree, and even in that, I use a distinction between hope and wishful thinking. So wishful thinking might be, my doctor's going to do this. Hope is, I'm going to have to actively participate. I think you're right. There is that middle ground.
There is, absolutely.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also think it's interesting, David, how kind of as we're talking, I keep hearing like all of this, yes, it's for you, but it's also for others. And that's kind of what you did with AMF, right? It was a supportive network. And now you have the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. And so it seems like everything you do, you continue to really kind of garner that support, like for yourself, but also for other people, and just kind of sharing that hope in this wonderful roundabout way that I think makes a huge difference in helping to create these moments, because sometimes they're hard to find just within ourselves. But, you know, we can give each other so much hope.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Kiri. I totally agree. I think there's, when I set out with AMF, it was to kind of channel my energy towards something in memory of my mom. But then all of a sudden, I started just seeing the impact on other students, and it was, wow, this is so much bigger than me, and wow, it's actually so important for it to be so much bigger than me. And the same thing has happened with Castleman disease. The book's titled Chasing My Cure, but I really think we probably should have renamed it Chasing Our Cure, because it started out as like me fighting for a treatment for myself, finding a treatment for myself, but now we're giving it to other patients, and we just started a clinical trial to give it to 24 more patients. And so for me, like, I obviously get a lot of, I don't know if the word satisfaction, but I get benefit out of the fact that this drug's helping me for sure. Survival, I get life out of it, but I also get so much out of hearing about a 13-year-old boy down the street at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that walked out of the ICU on the drug that I'm on based on the research that we're doing. I mean, that for me, gives me more joy than I think that I immediately get from it helping me. I think that I get a lot of joy out of this drug helping me. I get to be with my daughter, my wife, my friends, my family. It makes it possible for me to have joy, but I get so much joy when I get to see a patient on a drug that's benefiting from our work. And so I think that you're exactly right. There's oftentimes we go into something based on something that is good for us or helpful for us. You're a perfect example of that, Kiri. You started the chapter at UW Green Bay, but you've made this so much bigger than you. You've made the work that you do all about everyone else. And so I think that it's something that we can learn to really maximize life.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, this has been a real joy to talk with you. We're only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to give you the last word on some things. If there's someone who's listening who maybe wants to connect with, they're interested in your books, they want to connect with you in some way, how might they do that?
Sure. So I would say there's a few different ways to connect with me and my work. First, if you're a grieving college student, I would really, really recommend that you connect with AMF. It's an amazing group, amazing people that are helping to drive things forward. I'm much less involved than I was in my early days. I've really shifted my focus towards the Castleman's fight, but man, am I fortunate and thankful that we have such a great AMF team. So I really would recommend connecting with the AMF team. If you're interested in checking out We Get It, it's available on Amazon and in limited numbers of bookstores. But if you're interested in Chasing My Cure, which is coming out September 10th, it's available now on Amazon. It'll be available in bookstores all around the country on September 10th. And I hope that will be a resource, kind of the way that We Get It is a pocket grief support group. I really hope Chasing My Cure will be a tool that can be inspirational for anyone that's facing any life challenge. You don't have to be facing a disease of a loved one or yourself, but really I want it to be a bit of a playbook, or at least a universal tale about getting up and fighting back after life knocks you down. And of course, if you want to get in touch with me directly, I'd recommend, especially through the CDCN, going to the CDCN.org website, and you can find my contact information. You can email us and get in touch, and we'd love to help you. I guess the other thing I'd say is that if you're a rare disease patient and you're you don't have Castleman disease, you're not necessarily interested in AMF, but you have a rare disease and you'd like to understand maybe some of the things that we've done, on our website, chasingmycure.com, there's a whole page called Chasing Cures. It's all about how do we think bigger than Castleman disease. It's curious that, first it was me, then it's Castleman disease, and now it's how can we think bigger than Castleman about rare diseases more generally. And we have a whole page dedicated to how do we take some of the things we've learned for Castleman's and apply them to other rare diseases.
Perfect. Well, David, we just want to thank you once again for being our guest here on Let's Talk Death and for sharing information about your awesome books and just your philosophy about everything. I know I'm sure ready to dig into chasing your cure. So I'm super excited about that. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me on. It's such a pleasure. It's always wonderful to chat with you guys. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, David. And for those who are listening in, if you want to learn more about Heal Grief, you can visit us at healgrief.org. You can also learn more about Actively Moving Forward, the program we've talked about today, at the same website, healgrief.org.
So Let's Talk Death episodes will air monthly, so make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for a link to next month's episode.
And with that, we want to thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.